Good afternoon. My name is Maureen Lemastny, and I want to welcome you to this meeting of the Police Reform Work Group. I welcome not only our members, but also the public who are watching these proceedings. If you're joining us for the first time, our mission is to provide our County Executive, Angela Alsobrooks, with substantive recommendations that will establish fair practices across the board, maximize transparency, and restore public trust in law enforcement. The work group is not empowered to decide the merits of any pending or potential litigation, nor will the work group make any factual determinations in regard to any lawsuits or controversies. The work group was created to make recommendations regarding the Prince George's County Police Department and not to resolve, discuss, or comment upon any specific or alleged allegations. These policies include recruitment and retention, financial management, independent oversight, and internal policies. We have 5 subcommittees formed to make these recommendations in these areas. And these recommendations will be presented to the County Executive on December 4th of this year. Today, we will have a number of advocates who will speak to us concerning policing and police reform. My co-chair, Delegate Washington, will take over the meeting. Thank you, Delegate Washington.
Thank you, Judge Lemastny. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Alonzo Washington, State Delegate for District 22 here in Prince George's County, and I serve as the co-chair of the Police Reform Work Group. As many of you know, we have been meeting weekly for the past several months to develop innovative structural reforms to our county's police department. We have held presentations and discussions on training, hiring practices, employee retention, citizen complaints, the police department's budget, mental health, police use of force policies, and much more other topics. Today, we are doing something a little bit different than previous meetings. We are hosting an advocacy day, which will give us the opportunity to hear from several different groups from around the state and the county. These groups include Progressive Maryland, NAACP, CARE, Casa, the FOP, and several others. I believe that our recommendations to the county executive should be well-rounded, comprehensive, and innovative. It is my hope that by bringing together a diverse group of perspectives on policing in our county, we can produce the best recommendations possible to move our county into the next generation of public safety. I'm excited for the opportunity to be here tonight, and I look forward to another excellent discussion on policing and public safety in our community. First, we wanted to take this opportunity also to update the community on the police chief search for the Prince George's County Police Department. I'm gonna ask Ms. Shawn Stokes to give us a presentation and update on the police search to the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak this evening about the police search. So I'll start by sharing that we engaged an executive search firm probably towards the beginning of August of this year, 2020, by the name of Polyhire, and the county has used them on a number of different executive searches. So they kicked off the search by first having a web-based community engagement survey so that we would be able to get as much feedback as we could from the community on the desired attributes for the next police chief. And the search, the survey was conducted over a 6-week period, and the survey closed on August 31st. So maybe it was more closer towards the middle of July. Successfully, we received over 3,500 responses. And this represented about 35 unique different zip codes throughout the county. And the survey really, at a high level, tried to capture the greatest areas of concern from the community. So there were 11 different areas that were outlined in the survey, ranging from crime to gangs, vandalism, theft. But the top two that really stood out were around trust and engagement, as well as building and maintaining community. And it's interesting because some of the top qualities that they also would like to see in our next police chief also include ownership, someone who has a strong sense of integrity, and community concern, which are pretty consistent with the areas, the top areas that they wanted to see focused on in the county. The position started, I guess we advertised it as of August 31st, 2020, and it actually closes on Halloween this Saturday on the 31st. So there's still time to apply. We were able to successfully post it on many sites, 10 specifically from the executive search firm, as well as using, other means of doing some proactive recruitment that just didn't involve posting the position. Some of those websites, of course, are, you can find it on our county website, ICMA, which is the International City County Management organization, where many of executive level government positions are posted, the International Association of Police, and just a number of diversity sites like NOBLE, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, the International Network of Asian Public Administrators. So as you can see, there's been a lot in terms of posting and just really getting the word out there. And the great thing about posting on the websites, what happens often is other sites will also pick it up. So we were real successful with getting it out there to the public locally as well as nationally. What I would say is that at this point, we have about 47 applications that have been received. I am anticipating, after talking to the search firm, and I talk to him pretty much daily at this point, that in the next couple of days, we will probably see an influx. People are waiting a little bit until the last minute to post, because as you can imagine, I don't know if you've been watching, but there's a lot of turnover in the country right now. So people are kind of waiting until the last minute to maintain a level of confidentiality. But I'm excited to report that there are a few high potential candidates nationally that have reached out to our executive search firm because Prince George's County, of course, is an attractive place to come and work. So like I said, on Saturday is the last day, and we are hopeful to close it out. And really the next steps really involve the executive search firm meeting with a number of key stakeholders that have been identified by the county executive to meet with them, and also obtain some additional information in terms of what the desired attributes would be for our next police chief. And these meetings will be taking place over the next couple of weeks. I believe actually next week is a really big week for the executive search firm to meet with a number of the key stakeholders. So with a combination of using the survey as well as using the feedback from the stakeholders, we'll be able to use that to help inform what our interview process and questions will look like, as it will be led by, of course, our county executive. So, the county executive, the goal is that we will, lift up, I'm going to say maybe 5 to 10 strong candidates for her to consider, look at, so that we can then move to the next step and have those finalists vetted before we present them for a final interview. So that's pretty much, at a very high level what the process is. And I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Yes, if you have questions, please either put it in a chat for our members only, and then also raise your hand. I'll take any one of those if you're a member that would like to ask a question. I would like to ask a question about the process in once the county executive has selected maybe her top 3 candidates or one candidate before confirmation to the county council. What is the process before that?
Before it goes to
Before it goes to the county council, before her nominee goes to the county council, what does she plan any outreach to the community, and does she plan any outreach to the community during that time?
What I will say is that the community engagement survey is pretty much what the source has been in order to get collective feedback from the community. I would also say that, you know, the key stakeholders that the team has also reached out to is going to be used to inform that process. Now, that's not to say that, you know, the county executive, as well as the chief of staff, who, you know, of course, community engagement falls under, would not potentially do some additional outreach. And I think some of that may even come as a recommendation from this committee as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Ms. Oriata, with a question.
Yeah, just a quick question. You mentioned key stakeholders. Could you just elaborate on like what that key stakeholder group looks like? Is it more internal to law enforcement? Does it include community-based organizations that are more on the criminal justice reform lens?
I will say that it is a very diverse group, including, I believe, meeting with some of the members from this task force as well.
Will that be public or internal?
It'll be internal.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions. Judge Lemass, do you have any questions? Nope. Okay. All right. Well, Ms. Stokes, thank you very much for the presentation and the update. And if anyone has any questions on the police search, where can they go to find out more information or to contact the county about the police search if they had any questions?
So it's on the website. I will send it to Charmaine so that it can go directly to, you know, I'll send her the link so you can go directly to.
I'm asking for the public. I think everybody on here should be able to know where it's at. So I'm asking if you can tell the public where to go to find it.
Oh, I apologize. So it is, there is a link on the main page of the county website.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
It's all good. It's okay. All right. Well, can you say what the county website is so everybody knows what it is and where to go?
Oh gosh, yeah.
mypgc.gov, I believe.
I want to make sure I get this right. So
it's all right. We can come back to it. We'll come back. I'll announce it later. If you could put it in the chat, that's fine. So thank you, Ms. Stokes. We appreciate your presentation. And,
thank you so much.
Yeah,
I appreciate it. Yep.
Absolutely. Okay.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Yep.
Thanks.
So we'll go into the next presentation, which is from the family members of Mr. William Green, who are here with us today. I will leave it there and allow them to tell their own story and be able to present themselves and introduce themselves. So I believe we have on the line, we have Miss Nikki Green on the line. We have Shelly Green, William Little, and Brenda Green. Now you have 15 minutes to speak. And once you start speaking, the time starts, and you all can separate the time however you like. It will be not interrupted. We won't be taking any questions from you, but we'll be listening intently to what you have to say. And if any of the members of our committee has any questions, we'll be able to share those. I'll give them an opportunity to ask a couple of questions if there are any. So I'm gonna ask Miss Brenda Green, Miss Shelly Green, and Miss William and Miss Little to speak.
Mr. Little. William.
Yeah, I apologize, Mr. Little. So in any order, it's up to you, and your time will start now.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Okay. So my name is Shelly Green, and I'm Williams Green's daughter. And I just want to start off by saying that losing my father has been like very hard. It's been very hard for me. It's been very hard on all of my family. I'm 21. I never thought that I would have to do something like this, to speak on something like this. It affects me. It affects my whole family. It's days where we get together and we sit around and we want to call my dad or we want to talk to him, and we can't because his life was taken by a police officer who should have been monitored more closely than he was. It's a lot. His death, it could have been prevented if the officer.
Miss Green, can you turn your camera around so we all can see you in the right way? Just because it's just for your sake, so when people at home can see you. There we go.
It's on the charger. It might fall a little bit. Let me see.
It's okay. We can hear you though.
Oh, okay. His death could have been prevented if Prince George's Police Department would have done something and trained their officers more carefully. The officer that murdered my father, he had many earlier encounters that should have been a red flag and should have had him off the force. It should have been recognized that he wasn't fit to be an officer. And since it wasn't, now I don't have a father anymore. I don't have nobody I could call and talk to. I don't have my father anymore. Like, I don't know. That's all I have to say for right now. So we could just switch it over to my brother.
My name is William Little. I'm the son of William Green. Basically, to piggyback off of what my sister was saying, I feel like this whole situation could have been prevented if the people that were supposed to be doing their job was actually doing their job. I feel like it's a lot of flaws in the police departments. I mean, we can switch out chiefs and everything like that every 3 months if you want to, but if the policies and the laws and stuff are still the same, nothing is going to change. So I feel like this whole conversation and this, whole everything that we going through now it could have been prevented if jobs were being done right. Mm-hmm. So that's really all I have to say about it, because I really don't want to get too into it, because I have other things that I want to say that I probably shouldn't. So I'm just gonna leave it there.
Does anyone else in the family want to speak?
You
have to unmute yourself.
That's it for right now.
That's it.
Okay. Any questions for the family?
I just wanted to say thank you very much for coming this afternoon, and we're very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
I will repeat and also say thank you for being here today. I know it was very rough, and I know losing a parent, especially at this magnitude, is not easy. Losing a parent, period, is not easy at all. And so thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I want to thank you all. Ms. Morning, with a quick question.
No, I just want to say thank you to the Green family. The Green family knows me personally, and I just want to say it's been wonderful working with y'all. Y'all know where my heart is, and I appreciate y'all being on this call with us today. And hopefully with this Reform Commission, we will make a difference. And we will make a difference in the name of William Green, okay?
Thank you. Not seeing any other questions. I want to again thank the Green family for being here today, and our condolences are with you. And thank you. Okay, we will move on to our next speaker, Mr. Angelo Consoli, who is the president of the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 89. Mr. Consoli, you have 15 minutes to speak here today.
Thank you, Judge Lasney and Delegate Washington. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address this work group. I can't follow the Green family without having to, at least acknowledge and say that, on behalf of myself and the FOP, I'm sorry for your loss. Not being able to speak to the specifics of the case itself, because I don't know a lot of them, and it would be improper to do it here. I feel for your loss, and of what I've read, and if they're true, of the systems that should have been in place that could have helped prevent part of this through the early warning system, that it goes a little bit to some of the stuff I was going to talk to you today, and where what we have now is
Mr. Consoli, your mic went off. I can no longer hear you.
Is that any better? Now I'm losing the picture. Am I there?
You are there, yes.
Okay. I don't know where I cut off, but it goes a little bit to where, to some of the stuff I was going to speak to. I spoke earlier this year to the county council where, I said that that our department has made several changes since we came out of the consent decree back in late 2000s, and that the early warning system was part of that, and that I actually touted it because I thought it had been working well, but it's not something that we get to see or monitor. And if it wasn't working well, it's something that I definitely would stand behind, the fact that it definitely needs to be looked at and fixed to the point that it is. And in today's modern world with policing the way it is, you have a lot of issues that police officers go through and see, to include the horrors that we see. We have many officers that now do have mental stress that they suffer with. And these systems are supposed to be in place to catch that, so that you can get an officer help that needs help if they need it. And I'm not, and don't take me wrong, I'm not saying anything towards this case. I don't know anything on the background of it, but in general, moving down the line, that these are the kinds of things that we need to be looking at and making sure that we catch that. If we have an officer that's in need or an officer that's in trouble, that we catch it early. We're doing a much better part individually as officers to look at our individual officers, and when we see them suffering, that we do bring it up. But the one place it's lacking across the country within police departments is just that. It's the care of an individual officer when you do find that they are suffering from issues. And that's something that we as an FOP are looking into. It takes money, and we're looking at some of the national models that are out there where the FOPs actually step up and help along with some of that. And it's something we'll be looking at moving forward. With that, I'll move a little bit closer into what I was my prepared part of the speaking. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Angelo Consoli. I am the president of Fraternal Order Police Lodge 89. I represent the professional, hardworking men and women of the Prince George's County Police Department. And I was also recently elected to the second vice president for the Maryland State Lodge. And the time I have today, I would like to touch on just a few topics and comments that have been made over the course of the several weeks as I've watched from afar the different events that have taken on. The FOP stands ready to work in collaboration with all who are involved and interested in bringing about police reform. For some reason, there is a false impression out there that the FOP is an impediment to any change and is not willing to work towards change. To the contrary, the FOP is constantly striving to make changes that will enhance and improve the working conditions of our membership, as well as to bring about positive dialogue and service to the community that we serve. When I took over president of FOP 89, I pledged to our membership that I would increase our community involvement and look to take a more active role in the community. This is something that I felt we needed to do on a much larger scale than we had been doing before. Unfortunately, COVID-19 made the ability to get out and meet and make the introductions impossible in the way that I imagined we would be able to do so. As we have all adapted to this new way of socializing through web apps and social media, we're now going to look at starting the dialogue through these new ways. We are now looking to reach out and have dialogues with the community stakeholders. I would ask and also encourage anyone on this panel and anyone that's listening to this presentation that would like to discuss the issues surrounding policing and police reform to reach out to me, as I would like to establish lines of communication and work with the members of our community to work together to bring about a better relationship between the community and the officers that serve it. I would also like to work in partnership to bring about change that we can all agree to. In many instances, I think we find that our end goals are all the same, but we just have different ideas of how to get there. And however, I know some of us will not agree. And at the end of the day, if for those we agree not to disagree, we agree to disagree, then at least we have done so with a better understanding of each other's positions and a mutual respect for each other, instead of what appears to be an us against them platform that appears to be the norm across the country. As a long-time resident of Prince George's County, more specifically Largo, where I've lived for 45 of my almost 51 years, I not only have a professional interest, but I have a personal interest as well in the type of reform that is recommended, as well as the results and or fallout from those reforms. I feel it is imperative that we not make change for the sake of change or on emotion, but that we do so for the right reasons and with the full understanding of all the issues, the outcomes, the side effects, and we get input from all the stakeholders. The FOP is the union for the officers. We handle workplace and performance evaluation grievances. We negotiate working conditions, pay, benefits for the membership. We're also a fraternal and charitable organization. We do not hire, we do not train, we do not discipline, and we do not fire officers. A lot of the issues discussed on this task force deal with administrative, and their issues are not specific to the officers themselves, although they are officers themselves are getting the blame for the frustration and anger of the community for the lack of the administration to do what is right. For some reasons, the national and to some extent local narrative has somehow come down on every officer, even though the incidents and statistics show that the issues are not indicative of the actions and behaviors of every single police officer, but for a small few. This agency has done a lot to improve its image and get rid of officers that should not serve. It's unfair that we are all being looked at in a negative light. Watching these meetings, I can clearly see that there are many that have the same negative bias against all police officers that they readily accuse us of having against them. We need to ensure that as we move through these various topics within police reform, that we look at the issues with a clear and open mind and ensure that we are aware of the consequences of the actions that we take. And more specifically to specific topics, I'll quickly touch on. The first and foremost being body-worn cameras. We welcome body-worn cameras. We always have welcomed them. We've had the mobile video systems for almost 20 years, or it might even be over 20 years. The system has worked well, and the officers have always used them properly, or they use them properly and as they are, as the policy dictates. The main issues that we've had with the motor vehicle camera systems has not been due to lack of officers properly using them, but due to equipment failures and upgrades not being available as time has moved on. And that's why we've made it clear to the department and imperative to them that we should not roll out any kind of body-worn camera system until we can guarantee that every body-worn camera will last the entire shift with the battery, that it will be easily able to download all the information, that we have enough that if one breaks, it can be replaced. Because at the end of the day, when an incident is not recorded, it's going to be the officer that's blamed, not the equipment. And we should not have an officer being blamed for something that is equipment. We should make sure that policies are in place and that the discipline is well established and known to the officers. I've seen and heard here and in other forums where people are already anticipating officers doing the wrong things, not turning them on, illegally turning them off. I think we will find that that is not the case. Our officers are professional and we are trained to follow policy and to do what we are told. Many officers are going to enjoy the use of this camera because the camera in more instances is going to show that we are professional and that more times it will get an officer out of trouble than get him into trouble. These cameras will serve well for the community as well because they will get the transparency and accountability that they seek. And in court, we will have a clear picture of what happened. Although I do caution the fact that cameras do not show everything. They are unidimensional and only show the direction they are facing in. And sometimes we will be frustrated when it does not capture what we want it to capture. But hopefully with the audio, you can put the picture in your mind. So with that, we have always stood by the policy and look forward to its implementation. The other item I'd like to comment, even though it's not really being looked at through this committee as it's being looked at the state level, is the LEOBR. It's been mentioned on a few things here as an impediment. Just want to put it out there for the people to know that this is a false narrative that's kind of been put out. The LEOBR, the only thing wrong with it is the actual title. It should have never been called that. It should have been called what it truly is, which is an internal investigative and disciplinary due process. It's no different than the Prince George's County Employee Bill of Rights, the Patient's Bill of Rights, a Consumer Bill of Rights. It is just saying, these are your rights, this is what to expect. It sets in place a due process so that when the department properly investigates an officer and does what is required of it within it, that at the end of the day, if the chief decides to fire an officer, he will be fired and that will be the end of it and he will not come back. What you have in the rest of the country, and for the 16 states that have the LEOBR, what it's done is it's made it a statewide mandate that goes to every police officer. It does not do what the other states do that do not have an LEOBR, which is allow for the way an officer is disciplined to be handled through the internal system. If we do away with the LEOBR in the state of Maryland, we will have 148 different systems, as Prince George's County personnel law will take place for us. And within Prince George's County, each town that has their own personnel law, that will dictate how they are disciplined. So you will not be able to discipline everyone in one single uniform way. What you see throughout the rest of the country, and mark my words, look at the incidents down in Atlanta at the McDonald's and the one preceding it with the college students. They will get their jobs back. And what will happen out of it, and the reason why they will, is because prior to doing a proper and thorough investigation, people jump to conclusions and or let their emotions take cause. They fired officers based on a video. And when the full-blown investigation gets done and it goes to an arbitrator or to a hearing board, if the system prevails and shows that the officers acted properly and within their policy, they will be reinstated and be given back pay, which will set everyone off a second time. That is what the LEOBR prevents here. It stops us from making knee-jerk actions and getting rid of or firing somebody immediately when you can sit back. In most of these instances, the officer is suspended, and once they are suspended, they lose all their police powers. And in the felony, for right now, the felonies, they're not paid, so they're not even on the police payroll. But the main thing on them on the suspensions is they do not have police powers. They are not taking actions. And the issue with that is the LEOBR itself, you can actually discipline a person in as quickly as 20 days if you so desire. The reason why they take longer than that has nothing to do with the LEOBR and everything to do with other issues outside of our control and not in the FOP's realm. So with that, I would say that the bad blood that the LEOBR gets is wrong. And within the CCOP, it was mentioned that the LEOBR was an impediment to them being able to do their job, although their reports and what they said prior was that it's lack of funding. The CCOP has had since 2000, I believe it's the ability to do an independent investigation and also the ability to subpoena witnesses. They have not done so because they have not been funded to do so. But I also would go a step further and say they haven't done so because they haven't needed to do so. They get the full investigation. They get to see the entire investigation. And if anyone downloads and reads the reports that they have been turning in, they will see that over 90% of the time, they agree with the investigation. That they, after reading everything, believe that it's a proper investigation. And even though a lot of people will make issue that the majority of the cases end up being exonerated or sustained, and they think it's because a proper investigation was not done, that's not the case. And the CCOP has agreed with that. And also aside that, the LEOBR only says that the case has to be investigated by a police officer and the interview has to be done by a police officer. It does not say anything about you not having a citizen or civilian in the room with that police officer while he does that. So there are ways around that caveat within it if they wanted to do so. I truly believe the place for a lot of the checks and balances that people want is going to come through the CCOP and some of the actions they can do. And we'd be more than happy to discuss, our reasoning and thoughts behind that to anyone that wants to listen. The other thing I wanted to point out, in one of the meetings I watched, and when they were talking about the budget, overtime became an issue.
Mr. Consoli, that is your time, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here today, and we're going to take any questions. If you have any questions, please put it in the chat or raise your hand. I would like to first say that, again, thank you for being here. This committee and task force is looking for recommendations, and unfortunately, what I heard there was a lot of that you want to keep the status quo, and that things are okay the way they are. You were it sounded defensive to what this work group is working on. I didn't hear any innovations, any new ideas. You mentioned that the FOP is open to recommendations, open to reforms, but there wasn't one reform listed in your entire 15 minutes that you spoke. My question to you, sir, is, can you speak to one reform that you would like to see, that the FOP supports and would like to see done?
At the end of the day, you'd have to tell me which ones you want and we can weigh in on them. Most of the reforms that have been discussed, we already do. We don't allow chokeholds. We do de-escalation. And I can move down the list. The public defenders, the piece they put on the other day, every recommendation that I saw that they were asking for, with the exception of the body-worn cameras, we already do. The body-worn cameras was the only part that we didn't do, and that's only because we're just now rolling the system out. And the two of them, I think, dealt with policy, which the policy hasn't been finalized yet. At the end of the day, ultimately, we would need to know specifically what it was. I wasn't really given.
Thank you, Mr. Consoli. Thank you. And we're gonna leave the responses to about 60 seconds because I don't want the responses to go on too long. Okay. But I also want the questions from our members to be concise and direct as well. So we're gonna go with first Ms. Sonia Pruitt.
Mr. Consoli, I'm a retired police captain from Montgomery County, Maryland, so I'm very familiar with the LEOBR. Thank you for that rundown. But I have to agree with Delegate Washington. You didn't answer any questions regarding police reform, although you did make a statement that you were willing to talk about it. So I guess my question to you is, you mentioned the right reasons for making reform. What are the right reasons for making reform?
Well, for the most part, is at the end of the day, the community has to respect the police department and the police officers, and there has to be a mutual respect between them. And transparency, I'm all for. The main reason why I was not given any direction as to what I needed to go. I know there's 5 sub-work groups with a whole bunch of things. There's no way in 15 minutes I was going to be able to address every issue. I thought they wanted to just hear from me because like I said, I wasn't given direction. So I just gave the truth of what it is, which is we want to be involved in the process and like to be. I originally, had mentioned to the county executive that I would have liked to have sat on this panel. All I can do is what I can do in the 15 minutes I was given today.
Okay. I want to say thank you, but I'm going to have to say as I end that I'm just woefully disappointed, because if you know that this is a conversation surrounding police reform, I would expect that you would have done some research about what police reform looks like, even if it was just in general, because what I heard you do is protect police officers' rights, as is your role, as your leadership role. But you're talking to people who are looking for police reform. And I felt like you were kind of talking down to us. But you don't need to do that. What you need to do is show that you are really, really serious about being part of that conversation.
Thank you very much. Next question we have is Mr. Pastor Robertson.
Thank you, Delegate. Mr. Consoli, I've got a bunch of questions, but I'm going to narrow it down to one. Did I hear you say that you have been listening to these meetings and you have concluded them to be biased. Can you explain that?
No, I said, yeah, I've been listening to the meetings, but a lot of the conversation of what I've heard on a lot of them, and like I said, the one example was the body worn camera, where the conversation quickly went to, we need to come up with ways because they're going to turn the camera off. They're going to do, so it seems like almost every conversation went to the negative part of, the police. Like, what can we do because they're going to do this or that? I haven't heard one positive comment in reference to this police department. And like I said, we're not all tied into the narrative of what's going on across the country. This is a hardworking, very, very well, with a lot of great officers on it that do a lot of great work. And I haven't heard a single person say one positive thing about the police department.
Mr. Consoli, that is incorrect and wrong. A lot of folks on this work group has made very positive statements about our police department and care about our police. I've even made statements about the police who were injured during a situation that happened a couple of weeks ago, and sent out condolences to them and their family. We care about our police department here. We care about our police officers as well. Everyone on this group is committed to reforms and committed to make sure they're balanced, which is why we asked you to come here to provide us with recommendations, sir. So please don't demean this work group, because they're working extremely hard to make sure that we have some solid recommendations to the county executive. Thank you, sir. We're gonna go to the next question, Mr. Glenn Ivey.
Thank you. Let me ask you a couple bullet point questions, and not maybe a longer one, but would you support having civilians on the administrative review board, internal review boards in the police department?
As far as like which ones? You're talking about the actual hearing board?
Yes.
Under the LEOBR?
Well, yeah, I think apparently you'd have to amend it, but is that something that you?
Is that the one you're talking about? There's nothing wrong with that.
Okay. One of the things, some of the testimony we got was about data collection, and the distinction that was drawn was that with respect to crime issues, hotspots and the like, the department's really good at collecting that. But with respect to collecting data that goes to potential bias, demographics and the like, sometimes we found out even where the information's available to the department, they're not using it. Would you be comfortable supporting use of that data for performance reviews for individual officers, for squads and units at the police department?
For the use of statistics for talk about like discipline and policy? Yeah.
So for example, if you have an officer who makes, well, I'll come to traffic stops next, and that'll be my last questions, Delegate. I don't want to hog the floor, but there's from a pattern standpoint, looks like the officer, a red flag goes up that maybe this officer has got a specific demographic in mind that he or she is focusing on and making the stops that's inappropriate. Would that be the kind of thing that you believe, or the FOP would support, that kind of data being used to evaluate an officer when his time for review comes up?
Yes, I mean, that data would be fine, and you got to use it in conjunction with everything else that you're evaluating the person with and the area they're working in, and especially if I think even within complaints, when you get the same complaint 10 times on the same guy, eventually, whether it's a he said, she said, eventually you got to start giving more credence to the complaint, the more that come in saying the same thing. I mean, you can only get away with a guy starting the conversation off on a traffic stop with the same 5 words before you got to believe he's saying those 5 words.
Fair enough. Okay, and then last question, Delegate. I don't want to hog the floor, but one of the concerns that we've had, and I've had for a while personally too, is traffic stops. There's a real sense that, and anecdotal to some extent, and maybe to some extent backed up by data now, that there's a real focus on Black and brown young male drivers primarily getting traffic stops, then goes to a consent search, even if there isn't necessarily any indication that there's some contraband in the car, and that the stops are initially predicated on things like traffic, window tint, air fresheners hanging from the rearview mirror, the kinds of things that we don't really worry about from the standpoint of public safety on the streets. We're thinking of a couple of different approaches for restricting that because we think it's there's been abuse with respect to the use of it. What would be the FOP's position on dealing with that kind of issue and reducing the number of inappropriate traffic stops that are made?
Well, at the end of the day, I think all those kind of enforcements, traffic or even subject stops, they're all driven by the department and what their mandates are and where they're asking you to go and what they're asking you to do. And so with that, when those mandates lessen, then those incidents lessen. And same thing, I think this year, it might have been, I think it was Delegate Fisher, she put in a bill to make, I think it's the tag covers a secondary stop as opposed to primary. And so when those laws change, we adapt to what the laws are or the change of the law. So once, unfortunately, I guess there's so many, like when it comes to a vehicle, so many rules and laws out there, there's 1,000 ways you can pull a car over that the way to do it's probably just that, is to back out. If people don't want that, is to back out a lot of those. But as long as they're something that has to be enforced, the hard part is to tell someone not to enforce the law. That's the hard part. I mean, we'd be in support of, doing something, to not going after. We've never seen, and we don't have a policy to just stop someone to stop somebody. Usually they're driven by like an overtime program or a crime specific program in a specific area where that's the goal of it, is to stop, it's a high crime area. So you want to stop as many people as you can to find the guns or the drugs or whatever have you. And to lessen those is what lessens the overall stopping.
So just to close it out, I apologize.
Mr. Ivy, I'm sorry. We have to go. We have 5 people lined up to speak, so we can talk a little offline.
Very well.
We're going to ask Miss Josephine Morning to ask her question, and then we have next Miss Oriata, and I'm going to ask to keep it to 2 quick questions, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Gonzalez, for coming and meeting with us today. I have just 2 questions. Did I understand you to say that you didn't feel that we should be rolling out all of the body cams right now, that we should wait? Did I understand you to say that?
What we were saying was for full implementation for the body cameras, that we just need to ensure that we have all the pieces in place, that we should not just be putting them out on the street to put them out on the street if not all the parts are in place and the system's not functioning properly. Because it's kind of like the saying, don't put a car out on the street that only has 3 wheels, because it's just not going to work.
Okay. And the second thing is, I heard you say that the Justice Department decision and the actual MOU with the Justice Department 2000, that was in the year 2000, and that everything was conformed to, and it seems like things were getting better. But it seems like we've had more incidents within the last, I say 5 to 7 years. So what would be your take on that?
I mean, the department has their issues and we can always improve ourselves and we can always do better, but we are nowhere near where we were going into that consent decree. And I was on the department before and after, and the way this agency was prior and the things we didn't have to do and did to compare to what we have to do now, it's almost like night and day between those. But we still have a long ways to go.
Well, I thank you. And also I am with the SCLC of Prince George's County, and we would love to meet with you. Okay. Thank you. We'll try to make that happen. Right.
Oh, and ultimately, at the end of the day, like I said, I'd like to talk to anybody and everybody. And I'm sorry if the comment went a little too. I wasn't calling everyone biased. I just said that it just seemed like this. It seems like everything it was coming off against policy as opposed to supporting any of the policy. But I'm apologize for that.
Thank you,
Miss Oriata.
Thank you. I have one question, but I do have to say one thing before I ask my question. I appreciate your passion and maybe your frustration that you bring to the conversation in defending, being an advocate for officers that you represent. But hopefully in that you can understand and appreciate the passion, and I'll speak for myself, as individuals like myself, advocates bring to the table when we see our community dying. And we're here not because nothing's happened. We're here because of the family members like William Green that spoke earlier. We're here because the systems you talk about do not work. So to imply anything else is a disgrace to the reason why this group was formed. It was formed because people are dying, not for political gain, not to pick apart the police department, not to uplift your recommendations or your needs. And I hope every single person on this work group centers the reason this work group was formed was not to meet the needs of the police department that had weeks to present while we had one family of a person that was murdered, voice elevated here today. My question goes to, when we talk about weeding out bad officers early, I think that type of recommendation, if we could get to the root of that, will really be how we save individuals' lives. And the early warning system, one thing that was brought up is that there's no trigger that automatically leads to actually a tangible consequence. And so I think a recommendation is a flat number of a certain amount of a complaint of use of force triggering termination to weed out officers. Are those the type of recommendations, solutions that your organization could stand behind? Things that allow us, like you said, there are not all officers are bad, but for us to weed out those that are causing harm to our community.
Yeah, we would be behind them. I mean, the early warning system, the basis behind that and the gear for that is actually is not for discipline. It's more so to catch something that comes early, to try and find an officer that might be struggling or having an issue, so that you can correct the behavior either through training or talking to the person and finding out just that sometimes within that conversation is that there is no hope and it's got to move to a discipline side. But usually, like you mentioned, if there's 2 or 3 uses of force, they would have moved over to an investigation. So it's not necessarily the early warning system that has to trigger the investigations themselves, as they're found to be involved in that incident. You know, the progressive discipline would get to the point of separating that officer out. It would through the multiple instances. And to the first point, and I understand that I guess maybe I just put it wrong. My point is on the differences. Yes, you've had the department in to do a lot of stuff, and what we're saying is the difference is I'm not the department. I represent the rank and file, the officers, that ultimately any change that comes or any policy change that comes, we're the ones that ultimately are going to be the ones that have to work it. The buy-in has to come from us if it's going to be successful. And so I don't speak for the department, and the department doesn't speak for the officers. That they set the policy, we have to follow it. And so that's where some of the frustration came, that I can see that the people are upset with the policies and the lack of what's going on to catch the bad officer part of it. But we're the individual officers that are trying to, do our best and do it with those policies. And we would like to see change as well, but no one really, specifically came for that.
Miss DCAO Jackson.
Thank you, Delegate. Mr. Consoli, let me just say thank you for coming, and thank you to your members who do protect this community on a daily basis. I have 2 questions for you. The first is, my subcommittee has been dealing with mental health or response during a mental for folks that are in a mental crisis. And it does put our residents and our community in harm's way when we don't have a robust program in place to respond to persons who are experiencing mental health crises. Do you have a recommendation as it relates to a program or at least components of a program that should be in place?
The hard part behind that is just that it's finding the right program that works. I mean, I know the one company came on, Santee, that's worked with us in the past. Now, I haven't been on the street in a while, but when I was on the street, we would utilize them. And the issue that we found within them is they're very good at what they do, and then the counseling side of things, and can talk to people. But when the person's actually in crisis right then and there, there's not a lot that they could do to help as far as, if the person voluntarily wanted to bring themselves to a hospital, commit themselves, they could help and do all that part. But if the person didn't want to, they didn't have the means to mandatorily take the person. So then it relied on us. We had to arrest the person and do the emergency committal because there was no other way in law for that to be done. And then other people that had other, issues, even if it's within the mental parts, say they weren't to the level where they need to be committed, but maybe they were homeless and needed a place to go. There really was no program within the county to send them or issues like that. So I think a lot of what it comes to is just that we have to put, unfortunately, money and resources into the different programs for those people that they can get the help. And the hard part with it is a lot of those programs aren't around at 4 or 5 in the morning. And so they need to be almost 24-hour basis as well. But I think we're on with that group. It's just being able to expand what they can do a little bit better.
All right. So it sounds like you are in support of increasing mental health services. The second question, and forgive me, that was my son that jumped into the room. The second question has to do with trial boards. Can you tell me whether the FOP has a position on having a civilian member on a trial board?
No, I think that one was asked before. And yeah,
was it? I missed that. I'm sorry.
We wouldn't be opposed to having a person, a civilian on the trial board.
All right, I missed that. I apologize. That's all I have.
Thank you very much. Okay, our next question is Mr. Streeter. Did I miss you? Councilman Streeter, go ahead. If I apologize. I'm trying to go down the line of folks who are signed up. But go ahead, Mr. Streeter.
How you doing, Mr. Casoli? Thanks for being here. My question goes to, I guess you're part of the negotiations for the collective bargaining agreement, and you look at officer well-being as part of the recommendations. Wanted to hear your thoughts on what improvements you all may recommend that would, help the overall mental and well-being of the officers. I'm assuming that sometimes, mistakes are made, whatever it could be, just the working conditions that contribute to it. And so wanted to know if you have recommendations on how we can put the best possible officer on the street in terms of their mental well-being.
The hard part behind that is just that it's being able to, and I know they're looking at it at the state level, which is to have the ability every couple of years to come in and take a look at an officer. I don't think I think they're going a little bit too far when they go all the way to a full-blown evaluation. That can get very expensive, and you're not going to get the bang for your buck. I think you're better off with the what they call the lower level, which is the evaluation, where you can have the officers fill out a questionnaire that triggers, they're professionally done and they know how to go. That when an officer when you fill it out, if you're having some serious issues, you trigger things based on the questions you answer, then that would then trigger hey, we need to look at this officer a little bit closer. And then the ability to get that officer the help he needs. And if it's something that he can overcome and come back to work, fine. And if it's not, then we do the right thing in when he has to leave. But the hard part behind a lot of it, and the reason why you get a lot of officers that never come forward on it, is the stigma that goes with it and the fear of losing the job.
Yeah, they have highly stressful jobs, and notwithstanding the cost of providing the kinds of support that they need, do you have a recommendation about ideally what it would take to make sure that we are improving our force to the extent that we can win back community trust, and that we're putting officers in place that the community is not fearful of. We don't care about the cost. We just need a recommendation about what you think would improve that situation.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it comes to just that, increasing the community involvement in and probably within the community policing section that we have. But unfortunately, it takes manpower and time. That's why on our side within the FOP, the one thing we wanted to reach out to do, and we're going to try and do, is just that, is that we know they can't do it, but where we can, our officers do it off duty, and it's volunteer thing because you're interested in the community. is that our goal is to go out to the different, community fairs and the churches and whatnot, and be involved in their events and picnics and try and be there so that if people are willing, they come up and ask us questions, talk to us about whatever concerns they might have, to where hopefully people having a daily conversation or a weekly, whatever the case may be, conversation with police officers lets us be a little bit more humanized, but also they can take that information back to the rest of their friends in the community. And I think you when you do that and when you show the community that you have a stake in the community, that goes both ways. And eventually we got to get to a point where we all have mutual respect for each other.
Thank you very much. Miss Gutierrez, are you on the line still? Miss Gutierrez?
Hello,
I can hear you.
hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm having trouble with the computer, so I'm on the phone. Just my question is, from your experience as the president of the FOP, have you seen agencies engage in an annual audit, sort of looking at their work through a racial equity lens, determining how their practices are affecting the community, looking at particularly the race effects of who's getting pulled over, who's getting charged, where they're getting charged? I was disappointed to see that Prince George's County didn't have that data readily available, which makes me think that it's not happening. So can you talk about your experience with maybe other departments that are doing it, how often it's happening, and what your recommendation would be in that respect?
I haven't heard of anybody doing it, and I think I got a feeling that's probably why the state went to the extremes they did of creating the program where all the agencies have to do it, where now they collect the data. The issue with a lot of it though is I just think it's a lot more involved. I think the overall practice of it than just saying we had X amount of traffic stops in this one area, and this was the race that was pulled over, and this was the race that was pulled over, but the general area is this. Because I think in general, you also have to look at what's the population that the police officers are dealing with. What's the population? Some roads, it's what's the population that's on the road. You actually got to sit there and I think like the one gentleman that testified alluded to, you have to sit on the road and actually do a poll of the road, because you might think because we're in a certain area and it's 70% black, 30% white, that's the numbers you should be. But actually, when you sit there and poll the road, it's the way that everyone gets to a certain work site, and it's actually 90% of the people that drive on the road are white. So then therefore that's going to skew the way the numbers come. So there's a lot of different factors that play into them. So you have to be careful when you look at some of the stats when you just go by race and then a general population thing. And I think that's the issue, that when you do just the traffic stop data or just the subject stop data, it's tied strictly to the race that's shown on the ticket and the race that's shown for that general area. And it has to be a little bit more than that, I think.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up? So that's externally, let's say that's about enforcement. What about internally? The officers that we're hiring, the people in supervisory roles, how often are those evaluated in other agencies? And I feel like in those respects, the police department does have a little bit of the onus as to ensure that there's racial equity among hiring decisions, promotions, et cetera. So can you talk about that?
Right. Oh, yeah. And with that, I believe they do it on a daily basis. I think they're always conscious of it. Some of the decisions you can, they make with hiring decisions, they make all the time. And I'm sure they do it with a certain onus of, you have a qualified applicant pool, but you have a certain racial and gender makeup that you want to hire into me. So they make sure they meet that. When it comes to promotions, it's a little bit different because it's done on a ranking structure. So that's strictly based on merit. Well, not merit, lack of a better word, I think, the final score. So it's not like you pick from here to where it can be a random thing. It's done by specifics. But I do know that within those testings, they do look at that to see, is there anything within the testing that shows that it skews one way or the other? So I do know that they are looked at, but to what extent, I don't know, because it's an administrative thing, not something that we're part of. So I don't really know to how extensive that is.
Thank you.
So you don't have, thank you.
Thank you. Ms.
Okay.
Jackson, I see your name on here again. You're good? Okay, just want to make sure. Mr. Ruddy, and then after that, we're gonna have Miss Felix Lawson, and then we're going to have, I thought I saw another name, but okay. I think that might be the last question after that one. So go ahead, Mr. Ruddy.
Thank you, Delegate. Mr. Consoli, thank you for being here. Just quick question. Is the FOP supportive of an outside law enforcement agency doing the investigations into any allegations of criminal wrongdoing by the police officers?
When it comes to that, not really. And the reasoning behind that is, especially when it comes to like the homicides part of things, I put our detectives up against anybody in the state of Maryland. I don't think you're gonna find any of them that can do as good a job as they do. And so when it comes to, especially for our officers, having it investigated to where they're gonna get the best investigator that's going to get to the bottom of this is what happened. Here's the evidence, getting all the evidence to where we all see the true picture at the end of the day. I wouldn't want to take someone from somewhere else. I'd be afraid of it. The only thing we've discussed is if it was to be a feasible option that the state or whoever was looking to, that it has to be. And the problem is it's finances. I don't think people are going to want to come up with the money of it, but it's got to be like a statewide type agency with people that know what they're doing. It can't just be random. It's got to be people that know how to do those investigations, because what's at stake for everybody, it's not just the officer, it's the family of the person that's involved if it's a fatal encounter. And even in the more serious ones, everyone wants to get to the bottom of it. But in all my years on this department, and I spent 13 months in internal affairs, I've never seen any officer ever try and do anything that's not proper within the investigation. The whole mantra, a lot of people think that we try and help the officer out, look the other way. Everyone looks at it, the evidence leads to where the evidence leads, and everyone within the department knows that the people that have that job, even in internal affairs, you don't like going down there when you're in trouble, but you understand they got a job to do, and they do it to the best of their ability. And because of that, I would stack ours up against anybody, but if there was to be something, I think it would have to be a statewide agency. And most of those guys you're hiring would end up being retired officers because they know what they're doing. But that can get expensive. But the issues you have with that is, depending on where they're housed out of, it's a bad look if you have say it's a departmental shooting and now somebody has to lay in the street for 5 hours while it takes that group to get there from wherever they're coming from.
Okay, what about the prosecution?
Same thing with the prosecution. I think the thing saying that we don't that we have such a relationship with the prosecutors that they're not going to prosecute fully. I think Prince George County has proven just the opposite. I mean, we've had, I think, just three prosecutions last year, and we have a couple coming up. I mean, the state's attorney has done an excellent job on their cases against our officers, because same thing. Our state's attorneys are very professional, and they do a very good job at what they do. And if the evidence there, the officers, is found guilty, and if the evidence is not, they're acquitted, and the system works. That's the reason why we have the court system, and we got to trust. And at that, the state's attorney is elected. We got to trust our elected officials all around, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have the chair of the CCOP, Ms. Florence Felix Lawson.
Thank you, Delegate. And thank you, Mr. Consoli, for being here. Delegate just mentioned that I'm the chair of the CCOP, and I know you referenced the CCOP earlier in your remarks. You had made, the one thing I will ask about is your comment about the faulty equipment and it not being the officer's fault. I just want to clarify to make sure that I'm understanding you. And I want to share a little bit of the frustrations that the CCOP has in regards to the availability or lack thereof of evidence related to equipment. As you know, it's an important part of our work to review IA's investigations, and that includes the entire file, right? And so sometimes what we've found, and we put this in a couple of our annual reports, there's been some frustration because our review is limited to what is in the record. And so if a citizen is complaining about an interaction with a police officer, and the police officer had the opportunity to turn on recording, and we could have had that evidence to verify the citizen's complaints or the officer's statements, then we could have had a meaningful review. But we found that in a good number of those cases, the officer did not turn on the equipment. So we don't have audio necessary to corroborate the citizen's complaints or the officer's statements. And so because of the way the law is written, we have to essentially, because it's a preponderance of the evidence, despite that lack of evidence, we have to make a decision as to whether or not the decision is supported. And so oftentimes we're limited with the lack of that evidence, and it does limit our review. And so when you talk about equipment malfunction and it not being the officer's fault, my question to you is, do you not think it's the officers should be held accountable for making sure that the equipment is working when they're on duty and turned on, especially during interactions with citizens?
Oh, no, it definitely is. And before the officer actually goes into service every day, they do a function test to make sure it is working. The problem is, and it was well documented in a Washington Post article and a whole bunch of other, a couple follow-up places that it was quite a few years ago, so I don't remember the specific fact, but I want to say it was either 33% of the cameras didn't work, or it was only 30% of them did work in the cars. And the issue behind it is that those cameras, they get put in a car. We use cars because of lack of money for 10, 15 years. They get up in the 200,000 mile range, and the warranty on the camera goes out. And so when the warranty goes out, the camera pretty much just becomes a paperweight and wasn't getting replaced or fixed at the time. And so what the issue is with a lot of the cameras was that the officer had a camera system in the car, but it physically either didn't work or would be shoddy. Sometimes it would work, sometimes it weren't, because whatever it was that had to be fixed couldn't be fixed because the vehicle was out of warranty. And it was, I guess, the department had determined, or the county, I don't know who within that decision-making process, determined that it was not worth fixing the camera in a car that already had, 100,000 miles and wasn't going to last too much longer. So that car would never get a new camera, but as new cars came out, they got the newer technology. And that was the reasoning why we said when it came to the body-worn cameras, we got to make sure that doesn't happen because of the exact things that you're mentioning.
Right. And I will just say quickly that what I was referring to, and not necessarily the equipment inside the vehicle, there is equipment that the officers wear on their persons that they clip on and that they have to turn on. And oftentimes in our review, we see that the officer forgot to turn it on. And sometimes that can be pieces of evidence that can be dispositive in a case.
And seeing that one I wasn't aware of. We only had up until about 2 months ago 100 cameras out. So there shouldn't have been that many people with them, and you would hope they didn't all trigger complaints. But the commissioner reported the other day, the first year or so that you get it, you might have a lot of misses, only because it's a new technology and you got to get used to, that I guess until you get used that trigger memory of turn it on when you get dispatched. And like they explained, for us, it's going to be, you have to turn it on, immediately. And that's the part that I described within what I was talking about, the policy aspect, that we need to sit down with the department and come up with what is going to be the discipline on that. I fully believe, like the commissioner said, that you got to give them 1 or 2 times in that first year to get used to the system, to where we can't go straight to hardcore discipline. But then after that, at a certain point, you do have to start disciplining them, because it's the system that ultimately is going to save themselves more than not. But then to not activate it, you can only say oops so many times before it's no longer an oops.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Excuse me, Delegate Fisher. Delegate Fisher, are you there? There we go.
I'm here, Delegate Washington. Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Consolio. I appreciate it. I know we've had conversations and talks in the past. I have a 2-part question, which I don't know if Mr. Chair is going to allow me to do, but I'm doing it anyway. So the first part is, I'm the chair for our compliance and oversight subcommittee, and something that we're still struggling with and would like your input on is, when an officer has complaints against them, whether they're sustained, unsustained, unfounded, they're blue, they're purple, they're green, I don't really care. how do we find a way to implement like a trigger mechanism for a supervisor or someone else to either retrain, redirect, and get involved in the officer? I think in our group, there's a lot of conversations about before there's an incident and then after. So on the before part, you know, when we talk about what happened with Mr. Green, for example, there are 18 complaints, right? So what do you recommend in representing the membership on how we can implement a trigger mechanism when it comes to complaints, no matter what the status of the complaint is, so that we can prevent inappropriate uses of force? So that's the first question. I don't know if you want me to do that and then do the second one, Mr. Chair. Or should I just do both?
Go ahead and do both of them so that.
Okay, so that's the first one. The other one is and forgive me if I missed someone else covering this. What are your feelings about officers carrying their own insurance? You know, I know that I don't have $20 million to pay out in settlements, and I definitely know our county budget does not have that money, and the homeowners of Prince George's County does not have that money. And I really want to get insight on whether our officers need to be carrying insurance, and if we need to codify something in the county. I'm looking at Councilmember Streeter, who I'm a fan of, to codify something that if there are settlements paid out, at least 20 or 30% come from the police's budget, period, than the rest of the entire county. So those are the two of my questions. So thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Sorry I cheated.
Yeah, on the first one, I mean, those triggers should kick in within the internal affairs process or within internal affairs. I mean, they track the complaints, no different than, you know, along with the progressive discipline. If you do something the first time, it's whatever. You can do it a second time within a certain period of time. It moves up to the next level, moves up. Certain things can trigger retraining, and even within, within the policy, if it turns out that it's not something that needs to be disciplined, but it's a training issue, that's where that would trigger. And a lot of times that's where they do, part of the discipline is to send the person back like to the academy for retraining. So it should occur within the internal affairs, tracking of the complaint itself. And that's probably the best place for it, because they're the ones that see all the complaints, and know what they are. As to the second thing, I would never be for that. I mean, realistically, right now, it's I know when it popped up before, it was something that was looked into. Right now, I don't believe there's an insurance company in the United States of America that offers it. And the thing is, it would be very expensive. Like you said, nobody has 20 million to lay around. Well, you know, when it comes to police liability insurance, if we were to try and get it, it would be very high. And everyone wants to liken it to like what the doctors do and everything else. Well, the difference between a doctor and a cop is the reason why you're paying as much money as you pay when you go see the doctor is because he's passing that fee back to you through your medical insurance. We don't have the ability to do that because the county doesn't charge per call for service when we go out. So if I end up getting slapped with a $10,000 a year premium for that insurance, someone's got to pay for it. It shouldn't be me. And so it's going to end up coming back to salary. And so like if we carry the insurance, it's going to end up getting paid for by the county eventually, because it's going to end up probably in the salary aspect. And if an officer is holding the bag where he's going to have to pay like a $20,000 or $30,000 settlement, you'll probably find anyone that can retire today retire, because they're not going to want to get stuck with it. And as far as coming out of the budget, I think where that becomes an issue is you then penalize the community and the whole police department. It's all the county's money one way or the other. But if you actually specifically take it out of the budget, something has to get trimmed. So, you know, like take the latest $20 million, you know, you would have to take 20 million out of the police budget. And right now they can't even take $5 out of it. So I don't know where you would take the 20 million.
So what's your suggestion on how to pay these settlements of use of force by our police department?
I mean, unfortunately, it's got to stay the way it is. The county's self-insured on almost everything else, and that's I mean, it's the unfortunate part of doing.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, I don't think the Prince George's taxpayer is willing to hear that anymore. They might not. I would say, I can't speak for the entire county. I'm around a lot, and there's a couple of things that the public understands, and there's a couple of things that are very in the weeds that we all discuss here. What they understand is how much this costs. And they definitely don't want to be paying it. So what I'm saying is, instead of saying no, like, do you have a suggestion? Or the suggestion is to keep everything the same.
Look at it is look how much you're paying for car insurance, and that's for a $20,000 or $30,000 accident. multiply that by what an insurance company would charge a premium for 20 or 30 million. That's what a cop would end up paying. And what would happen is you think we barely get anybody applying now. Wait until the office, a kid wanting to be the police finds out that, you now have to pay a $10,000, premium a year for insurance. Now, right now, I don't know of any company that offers it. So you might not ever find a company that wants to, because, I don't know who would want to pay out that kind of that money. What insurance company would ever want to settle for anything to pay out that kind of money that could end up happening? Because I think someone gave the example in New York City, they pay $200 million a year out. I don't know what insurance company would ever want to get involved in something where they know they're going to have to pay $200 million a year out. So I think the hard part can be finding that.
Thank you, Mr. Consoli. We appreciate the response. And again, Jesla Massey, do you have any comments, any statements?
No, I'd just like to thank you for being here, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so with that said, I want to thank all of our members for your thoughtful questions and for putting your time and effort into this initiative and work group for the past several months. I know you all are really working hard and trying to come up with the best reforms for our county. And I appreciate all of the work and all of the hard work that you're putting into this initiative. So thank you all. We're going to move on to two next presenters and advocates who will both speak simultaneously, who will both speak one after the next, and then we'll take a few questions from them. We're going to ask Pastor Tony Lee from Community of Hope AME Church to speak for 5 minutes. And then we're going to ask Miss Amity Pope and Miss Janet Parker from the PG Changemakers, Miss Amity Pope to speak. And we're going to start with Reverend Tony Lee first, and you start, and we're starting now, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Delegate. I'm grateful to be here with this task force. It's extremely important task force at this extremely significant time in the history of Prince George's County. I do want to share that I have been blessed as a faith leader to have been working with police chiefs and police department here since being a youth minister to Ebenezer AME Church. And so I've been working with chiefs since Chief High, all the way to the current chief. And this, and the Prince George's County Police Department has been one in which we have had an interesting kind of relationship. It's been part protest, part advocacy, part partnership. And we've been able in different positions as faith leader to do and navigate several types of ways. I think with the work that you all are doing, I would like to, with the 5 minutes, which is, I would like to share a couple of pieces. One, I do believe that if you're looking at a transformation of the police department here in Prince George's County, that you can't look at transformation of the police department in Prince George's County. What I mean by that is that if you're just looking at the police department, you've missed it. We have to look at how we're reshaping county government and how that interacts with public safety, because just to focus on the police, and I believe that you all are doing this, I've looked at some of the things you all are talking about, but just to be able to focus on the police department, you'll always miss, because the police department is a part of a larger broken system. But there's a need to relook at how we look at public safety and the things that are needed to be able to keep people safe. And so in that, there's a need to look at how we allocate resources. There's a need to look at the kinds of services that we have that are able to then be a part of a larger system that connects to policing, and policing is a part of. And so that would mean that we have to be able to look at our mental health and community engagement. We'll have to be able to look at how we shape systems to be able to navigate things, because what we're asking right now is we're asking people who are trained, we're asking police to literally navigate situations they're not trained for. We're asking police to be able to deal with things that are not criminal issues. We're asking police to be able to respond to issues that really police should not be there for. And so what happens is, if you're a hammer, you see everything as a nail. If you're a hammer, you've been trained to be a hammer, then every time you get to a situation, you look at it as a nail and you're dealing with it as a nail, and you don't have the training to be able to do it in a different way. And so I believe that we have to look at how we are, and I know that people have different ways of saying this, but I believe there is going to have to be a way in which we look at how we reallocate resources and are able to put other services in place to be able to navigate other kinds of calls. There's certain calls that the police just should not be going to. There are certain calls the police should be going to, and we need them to be going to and need them to be dealing with, but there are certain calls the police should never be on the scene. And oftentimes what happens is that we are asking folks who are trained in one certain way, that we're asking a hammer to be a screwdriver, we're asking a hammer to be a wrench, or we're asking a hammer to be what it's not trained for. One. Two, that we have to be able to shape a system that is so transparent that we can trust it again. And the challenge also is that we have a system that has been shaped to protect itself. And it's so insular that therefore it is shaped to be able to take care of itself in such a way that anytime there are challenges to it, it then kind of goes within this kind of blue wall or this kind of blue code that then makes sure that it's taking care of itself. And so I think that there have to be things. We cannot look at individual kind of transitional things in policing. We have to look literally at how to reshape systematically, not just the Prince George's County Police Department, but the whole way we look at the whole way we shape Prince George's County governance in relationship to public safety, and the way that connects with community policing, the way that connects with our mental health system. We're trying to fix one broke system in the midst of a whole bunch of broke systems. And so we're going to have to be able to understand that if we don't fix our mental health stuff and our social services stuff and our family services stuff, then there's no way we can actually do policing right, because our police don't have the tools to do what we need them to do, and will keep being woefully disturbed at what's not happening, because we haven't looked at the larger picture and the larger ramifications. Thank you so much. I believe my time is done.
Yeah, that was so perfect. That was great. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that being on
Thank you
time.
so much.
And I appreciate the setup over there as well.
Oh, bless you. Thank you.
Let's go to the next presenters, Miss Amity Pope and Miss Jane Parker.
Thank you, Chair Alonzo Washington and Chair Maureen Lamsey. I apologize if I've mispronounced your name. So we are going to have a PowerPoint that's coming up, so I hope we did not hit start on the thing. And if you could just put it in present mode. All right. Okay, thanks. So PG Changemakers. So I'm Amity Pope, one of the co-founders of PG Changemakers. PG Changemakers is a coalition of over 20 plus community organizations in this county committed to breaking down systems built on systemic racism. Ultimately, we demand justice and accountability. And we believe the undertaking of this task force is one that is both pivotal and vital to our community. So these recommendations that we bring forth address internal policies and procedures that can be enforced through and by department heads. And we have them listed in 2 buckets. You can go to the next slide. We are definitely urging that the County Executive Office, as well as the County Council offices and other elected officials, see those legislations and recommendations that can go at the state level recommendations for legislation be advanced. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So in our answers bucket, we would like for a reduction in the overtime budget by 65% over the next 2 years, and implementation of fines for non-repayment of overtime for private security events. We'd like to see, I'm sorry, we would like, answer us. We would like everything here, publicizing our bargaining unit, bargaining rights, collective bargaining with community input, everything public, a transparent process with the chief of police that goes beyond just the community survey, but has it as such as like a candidate forum that we've had with elected officials and other people seeking office, so that community members can ask questions and get feedback in real time. We would also like to see a publicly monitored countywide database that is easily accessible by the public for all use of force complaints, and promotion and pay increases for structures that are tied to citizen complaints. We want to see alterations in pay for that. Next slide. And so now in Empower Us, we want to reduce the budget by 65% over the next 2 years and implement fines for non-repayment of overtime. We also want to look at increasing the Department of Family and Social Services by 50% over a 2-year period. Next slide. We like to restructure the application process, and we recommend all these recommendations, as well as the composition of the authority limits for the Civilian Review Board to include various community members, like we heard, but at least 2 returning citizens added to that, that review board. We'd also like to have the release of all PGPD policies, procedures, and a negotiated agreement made easily accessible and online for the public at a click of a button. We want to see a design approach for all public comments. So openpolicy.org is an example of that, and it's working well in other places. And only invest in body cameras that storage is robust and the video is accessible upon immediate request. So you can advance beyond. And to the next slide. And lastly, we want a universal, rigorous data software system that is that universal, so it encompasses municipalities and the county for all police interactions, broken down by demographics, especially race, and an immediate stop on Terry frisks and stops, and that data made public to the community. And now I'm going to have my partner here, Gina Parker, present the last slides.
This next slide, you can go over. This next set of slides is to protect the community. We would like law enforcement taken out of schools, fire officers who assault residents or use racist language or racially biased, terminate the salaries and pensions of officers who continually cause harm to the community. Cost of lawsuits should come out of the agency's budget to be capped at no less than 45%. Ban the use of 1033 programs for PGPD in towns and municipalities. You can go to the next slide, please. Move traffic enforcement from the police department to the Department of Transportation, discontinue the use of license plate readers, create strict guidelines for police-initiated calls of service, require police officers to invest in individual liability insurance. We actually have a company who does that. Do not hire officers that have been decertified. Investigate the steps needed to take the request for officers to live in the county. Next slide, please. Stop collaboration with ICE and terrorist task force and other surveillance operations, and decriminalize public orders and surveillance-based offenses, including ending police role within homeless outreach and sweeps, response to unmet mental health and economic needs, youth engagement, and enforcement of public health orders. I apologize if I'm moving fast. I just want to make sure we stay in our time. The next slide, please. Fund community-based and community-controlled violence prevention, violence interrupter programs not affiliated with the police, and allocate funding in the state's attorney's office to continue expanding diversion programs for homeless, juveniles, youth, and sex workers to include trafficked workers as well.
Ms. Parker, I'm gonna have to stop you there, and I want to say you can if you send your slide to us, and I believe we have it, so we'll take it from there, and we'll take any questions, and you can add any of the other ones during the question period, if that works. Okay.
It was one last slide, but okay.
Great. Well, thank you for the presentation to both Reverend Lee, Ms. Parker, and Ms. Pope. Wanted to see if there's any questions of the panel here.
I just wanted to say to Reverend Lee, I thought you were brilliant in your observations. They were very, very great. That holistic approach, I think, is so appropriate. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Quick question coming from Miss Oriata, who's going to ask one question.
Yes, I will, if you'll let me use that time to question for one statement. As many of you know, also the co-founder of PG Changemakers. And so I just wanted to let everyone know that these recommendations were pulled not from just the 20 organizations, but the community. We're also gonna allow these recommendations to be put into a database where it's a document and send it over, and also make those recommendations public to the community as well. And so I just wanted to elevate that one last point that they didn't get to a chance to get to.
Awesome. Tag team, I love it. All right, thank you everyone. We appreciate that. We're gonna go on to our next, not seeing any more questions. I wanna thank you all, Reverend and PG Changemakers, thank you very much, and look forward to partnering with you in the future, and we will take your comments into consideration. Our next speakers will be Mr. Willie Flowers of the NAACP, and then Mr. Gustavo Torres, who's the Executive Director of Casa. We're gonna have Mr. Flowers go first, and whenever you're ready, Mr. Flowers, are you still on? Okay, Mr. Torres, are you on?
Yes, I am. I am.
There we go.
Thank you. And I'm very sorry. I was in mute.
No, it's okay.
You can have the 5 minutes right now. Thank you so much, Delegate Alonso Washington and Josh Lamsey. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Gustavo Torres, and I am the Executive Director of Casa. As an Executive Director of Casa, I have the honor of serving over 100,000 members across Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C. Our mission at Casa is to create a more just society by building power and improving the quality of life in working class and immigrant communities. We believe that changing the policy improves the quality of life of the almost 25,000 members we serve in Prince George County. Last year, the residents of Prince George County won a major victory when the County Council passed CV 62 2019, the County Trust Act. And as you know, trust is essential for the collaboration between the police and the community. If we don't have trust in the community, in the police, it's impossible to develop a strong relationship. We believe that it's very, very important that in Prince George County, being Black or brown is not an excuse for harassment or targeting. So that is the reason why we believe that is very important that these recommendations that we are suggesting, that by the way, we already submitted in a formal letter to both of you as a co-chairs, and now I am summarizing what it is. But right now I just want to share very briefly 2 or 3 specific examples of how my community, our members, the Prince George County residents are facing the challenges with the police. Maria is an immigrant from El Salvador and hardworking mother of 8-year-old daughter. Maria called the Prince George Police Department during domestic dispute at her apartment in Hyattsville. During that domestic violence call, police officers noticed a stack of telephone cards in her apartment. They later mailed her an arrest warrant for operating a business without a license, supposedly selling phone cards. When she went to the police station, she was detained. She was arrested, and then they called ICE. ICE ordered her detained. Maria will never consider call the police again when she sees this kind of crisis in her life. That is the kind of thing that I believe that is very important that we resolve. And we believe that through the Trust Act, we can resolve that issue. Another example that I want to bring to your attention is Melvin. Melvin is from New Carrollton. Soon after he hearing a commotion of a car running into the parked cars along the street in March 2018, he went outside to see the perpetrator crash into a van at the end of the street and go out of the car. He was following the perpetrator of the accident when the New Carrollton Police Department tackled him to the ground, choked him, and proceeded him to call immigration on him. Another police officer arrived that knew Melvin and say, hey, don't worry don't call the police. He's a good guy. So you see, that is an example of why the police need to call ICE in these particular cases. That is the kind of situation that we really need to resolve. And that is the reason why we believe that it's very important that we have the following recommendations implemented. Number one, accountability in policing. That accountability in policing bill support police accountability to the mandatory use of police body cameras. Is so very important. We also asked to make sure that the footage be stored at least for 6 months, and that any footage that is included an incident that is under investigation be stored at least for 3 years. Number two, transparency in policing. This bill for us is very important because bring transparency and accountability to the extrajudicial gang database. In many occasions, members of our family have been accused of being members of the gang without no explanation. And I believe that need to require a notification and appeal process for the gang database. This is among the most important recommendations that we have for this body. In addition, Casa is dedicated together with other organizations across the state to repeal the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights and other reforms. We urge the work group to community support for that repeal. Thank you very much.
Man, that was perfect. Okay, any questions of Mr. Torres here? Ms. Oriata. Oh, and I see you, Judge. I'll come right to you right after.
No problem.
Thank you so much for the presentation. And you referenced the legislation around the gang database, and I completely agree with need reform around that. I was just curious because I know that Casa had a bill that they were trying to introduce before that would try to do notification around the gang database. Is that something that they're looking at reintroducing, or is it on the table, or is the ask for us to recommendation support for that for the county council?
Thank you so much for the question. Absolutely, we want to reintroduce the legislation, and we want this body to support the legislation. One of the challenges that we faced was that they told us there was a lack of budget to be able to implement it. So I think that is now the time to review this, because I know that that is going to help in many areas, not only the police department, but our community that all the time face that relationship between the police and our communities in general.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Judge Williams.
Yes, thank you, Delegate Washington. Mr. Gustavo, how are you? We met several months ago when I visited you at Casa. You remember that?
Absolutely, Judge.
Yes,
how are
yes,
you? Of course.
I'm doing well, doing well. I have just one short question. Wanted to know whether you have any real problems with law enforcement inappropriately stopping members of your community just to check citizenship and other kinds of credentials. Do you have any problems with that?
Josh, unfortunately, we do. As I mentioned to you, as I mentioned before, I believe that it's so very important that we find ways to make sure that, again, Black and Browns in Prince George feel welcome and feel that they don't need to be harassed just because they are Black and Brown. So we face that kind of situation all the time in our community. Thank you so much, Josh, for that question.
All right, thank you.
I know, Mr. Torres, can you send everybody, I know you said you're sending it to the judge and I, the copy of Casa's letter that was submitted. When you send it to us, we'll send it to the whole group. Ms. Gutierrez is asking for a copy of the letter as well.
Okay, so I don't need to do it, or happy to do it, to send it to all of you. Just please let me know, Delegate, and I'm happy to do it.
You got it. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Any other questions?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Torres. Appreciate it. All right, we're going to go to our next presenters. We have Miss Kelly White, Esquire, who's the Program Director of Capital Area Immigrant Rights Coalition and Mrs. Beth Reed. She is the Vice President of the Riverdale Heights, Riverdale Hills, and Crestwood Community Association. Ms. White, you'll go first.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing this space with me tonight and for including me in this conversation. I'm going to take a radical bent here. I've been practicing immigration law for about 10 years. For the last 7 years, I've been serving people who were exclusively detained. What I've seen is largely a continuation of the criminal justice system, quote unquote criminal justice system, into the immigration system, where the rate of African and Caribbean folks is 6 times higher than that of the general population in ICE detention. And that although folks from African nations and Caribbean only make 4% of the general population at large, they make up 24% of those people who are found in solitary confinement in immigration detention. So what I've seen in terms of what's important for police reform is this continuation. Prince George's County has supported Community Inclusiveness Act, thank you all, as well as the Trust Act, and thank you all as what referring to what Gustavo outlined earlier. The radical amendment I guess I'm going to mention is 10 years ago, I had a professor, Raha Georgiani, who testified before Congress that under asylum law, if you were to look at the use of force incidents and the police brutality and incarceration rates in this country, people of color would qualify for asylum in other countries. Although that's a radical bent, it's something that helps me shift my framework. And when we think about, as PG Changemakers presented, looking at that language, if there's officers using racist language, that's something in asylum law I would use to prove nexus and to prove an asylum claim, and that someone is deserving of quote unquote protection. And I want to be clear that I'm not, asylum and refugees are currently, there's sort of this victimization view. Refugees are some of the most tenacious, powerful people I know. And I just want to be clear about that that's not the analogy I'm trying to make. But it is out there. There's a reason that my professor testified before Congress on this piece. And then I also and the other piece I want to emphasize is what Gustavo brought up on gang databases. I find it very concerning that the evidence and the descriptions that are used in gang databases locally then end up in immigration court, and that there's no procedural due process mechanism to change or modify that database. That once you're marked as someone wearing white sneakers who might be a alleged gang member, you can never get rid of that. It goes on to the FBI, it goes on to NCIS, it goes on everywhere. And that is the evidence that's used against people I'm working with in detention to deny them bond, to deny them time away from their families, and ultimately, in some cases, to deny them asylum here in the United States. Community members who've been here 10, 15 years. For simple thing is like wearing white sneakers or having certain tattoos that, can be as much as artistic tattoos. So those are the pieces I want to emphasize. The gang database is an important point to push. The Trust Act, having transparency is important in any functioning society that honors the rule of law. And I just want to thank you all for the points you've raised tonight too.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Beth Reed.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon or evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks. So as Delegate Washington say, my name is Beth Reed. I am the Vice President of the Riverdale Hills, Riverdale Heights, and Crestwood Community Association. I'll be discussing police reform through experiencing firsthand on what works well and what should be expanded. The Community Association was formed in 2007. We started the association mainly because of gang issues. There was an increased presence in the area along with gang taggings on every street corner from Riverdale Road to William Wirt Middle School. At the time, Councilmember Olson held a community walkthrough and invited District 1 police and other community representatives to meet with us and learn of the issues affecting the community. We worked with the police department to include, at the time, Captain Hector Valles, who is now the interim police chief, and at the time, Sergeant Bud Dooley, to address gang tagging problems. Between the police and association members, the majority of the taggings were covered over or removed. The association donated 30 gallons of paint to District 1's community response team, as well as a gallon-sized spray container of paint remover. Through the police program, Community-Oriented Policing Services, also known as COPS, we were assigned a COPS officer who attended all our association meetings and still does, patrolled the community, worked with other agencies to bring a joint focus to the problem areas, and organized community walkthroughs in the neighborhood. I'll speak more about how the COPS program has helped our community in a little bit. Since 2009, we have participated in the annual National Night Out. If you're not familiar with this program, it is meant to increase awareness about police programs in the community and give residents a chance to talk with the police and interact with them in a fun environment. During a couple of our events, we partnered with the police to provide child identification kits to all the residents. In 2008, myself and the president of our association enrolled in and graduated from the Prince George's County Citizens Police Academy. The Citizens Police Academy program is grossly underfunded and underappreciated. This program helps residents to understand the training the police undertake and the extreme conditions they must endure while serving the community. This training course takes students through all the training the police cadets go through, but without the physical requirements, thankfully. The two biggest takeaways for me was the lesson on the use of force matrix and the shoot, no shoot practice room. This practice room allows officers to practice the implementation of the use of force matrix in real time and for real life scenarios. I feel more funding and time should be dedicated to that, to officers can use this room as often as possible. Maybe even require them to requalify annually in this room. The COPS program, which I mentioned earlier, is a community-based program that dedicates police officers to specific areas with the goal of reducing crime and enhancing the quality of life of those communities. Over the years, our COPS officers have engaged with all members of our community. They have been seen playing basketball with the kids, offering free home security assessments, and organizing community walks where association members, county representatives, and police walk door to door and introduce themselves to the residents. We notify the residents of various county programs available to them, discuss any concerns they may have, and encourage them to get involved with the community association. Our COPS officers have participated with us in our annual stream cleanup. They even have brought their families to help us clean up the woods in the stream that lays between William Wirt Middle School and Parkdale High School. Our first stream cleanup was held in 2009, and we were very surprised at how many trees were tagged by the gangs. Our COPS officer at the time formed a joint team to sweep through the woods between William Wirt and Parkdale to run the gangs out of this area. The team consisted of members of the Park Police, Riverdale Park Police, and the gang unit from Prince George's County Police. Our present COPS officer, Corporal Argueta, has worked hard to tackle issues such as abandoned cars, huge loud parties, and neighborhood disputes before they escalate.
Mrs. Reed, can you say your last comment, please?
I said that our COPS officer right now, Corporal Argueta, has worked hard to tackle issues such as abandoned cars, huge loud parties, and neighbors disputes before they escalate. Because the COPS program,
Ms. Reed, I'm sorry. I was asking for you to summarize so that we can start asking questions.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. So in summary, I'm almost done. Any discussion on police reform must include more funding for the COPS program. This program helps stop problems before they even start. In closing, I believe police reform isn't about the funding, but rather about increased funding, but not for guns and vehicles, but rather for more training and programs aimed at community interaction before crime occurs. A well-trained and engaged police force can better protect and serve residents than an overworked and underfunded one can. Thank you.
Thank you. Judge Lamassney with a question.
Yeah, thank you very much for that presentation. Ms. White, are you saying that the gang registry that's developed and kept by Prince George's County, it's been admitted in evidence in an immigration proceeding?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. And as well as what comes in police reports, as well as it ends up being transferred to NCIS and other databases.
Thank you.
Great. And Miss White, can you just describe a little bit more about what your organization does and what your organization has been doing in Prince George's County?
Yeah, I'd love to. We work working with people in detention in the 5 area detention centers. Pre-COVID, I would say on any given day, there's about 1,600 people detained that we're serving. Prince George's County in 2017 launched the first pilot representation program serving detained immigrants in our area. So we've been able to represent hundreds of people over the last 3 years through Prince George's County, ensuring that parents who are detained can bond out and reunite with their family members and their children, as well as their community here in Prince George's County. It's been a historical program and attracted attention of some major funders this last year, so that we were able to launch. We've just launched this month, but the new attorneys are coming in a few weeks to represent every single detained Prince George immigrant. Which is about 220 people a year that they're detained out of Prince George's County, thanks to the Immigrant Justice Corps partnership led by Jojo Annabelle.
Thank you very much. Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, Ms. White and Mrs. Reed, I want to thank you both for your advocacy today, and thank you for your presentations. We're going to go on to our last speaker, Ms. Doris Reed, who's the Executive Director of the Association of Supervisory and Administrative School Personnel Union. Ms. Reed.
Thank you very much. I was asked to address this committee by the County Executive's Office regarding school resources officers, and I appreciate the opportunity. When the subject first came up of removing the SROs from the schools, we were not made aware of it. We actually saw it on the news the night that the board members discussed it. None of the board members had talked to any of us about whether this was a good idea, bad idea, or otherwise. We sent a letter to the board in June asking them not to remove the SROs, especially since the administrators are the ones who risk their lives every day in the schools. And I say that because when the fights break out in the schools, it's not the teachers that break up those fights. It's the school administrators. Anything happens, they say, call an administrator. And then the administrators have to call school security. I have members who have had to retire on disability from breaking up fights in the schools. And I know there are a number of people that are saying, well, we need more mental health. We agree. We definitely need more mental health services. But that does not exclude the fact that you also need the SROs. And I'm dealing in the facts, the reality of the school system, not the hypotheticals. You have people out here who are saying, oh, the SROs, and they're so abusive in the schools, and they frighten the children and all of this kind of thing. Okay, they're talking these big numbers. Well, you talk to Dr. Golson, because we've asked for the numbers, we've looked at it. And you look at in a year, the SROs had 9 arrests. Now, school security had 200 plus. Now that's a problem because you shouldn't have that many things happening in a school that you have to have that many arrests. But that's another issue to be addressed. One of the problems is people don't want to hear what's really going on in the schools. Now, none of us want to badmouth or project anything negative on the schools. We get enough help from Channel 5 News with that mess without us doing it. But you also have to look at the reality. These kids don't come to school and learn the bad behavior. They bring it with them from home. And nobody wants to talk to the parents and say, we need your help. You have to straighten out your kids when you send them to the school so you don't have these fights breaking out. And when you're looking at the mental health piece, it's very nice to say you want to add social workers or psychologists or counselors. But when you have a situation, and this is a situation that happened, where you have the gang from the apartment across the street coming to the school to fight some kid that's already inside the school, there's not going to be a social worker or a psychologist that's going to step out there in front of that gang and prevent them from going into that school. It was the SRO and assistant principals who stopped that mess. And this is one school, but it's not like that only happens in one school. And you have kids that bring guns to school, drugs to school. You know, you have to have professional law enforcement that can step in and help these administrators. And it's not only that piece, because one of the things that we did, we surveyed our members, because I don't work in the school, they do. We surveyed our members and said, give us your opinion. Tell us some specific incidents that have happened that we could share with the Board of Ed. And I will gladly, Delegate Washington, if you want, share that letter and some of the examples from our people of what has happened. There was not a single person that responded and said, yes, the SROs need to go. They said, no, we definitely, desperately need them. And one of the things that they pointed out was the fact that the SROs have gotten to know the students and the families. And in some of the cases, these kids don't have anyone to talk to at home. They talk to the SROs. So they have that side of it too, where they're actually helping some of the students and helping some of the families. So, you know, it's troubling when you hear people who aren't in the schools, don't work in the school, don't really know firsthand what's going on, that are jumping on the bandwagon, because we know everybody's out here talking about defund the police. Not into that, not touching that. But don't jump on the trend and carry that over to the SROs and cause a problem where there isn't a problem. So I wanted to, you know, share that information with you. If there's anything else I can share with you, or if you have any questions, I'm here. And I appreciate the opportunity, because like I said, nobody talked to us before they jumped out publicly and said, oh, let's do this. Let's remove the SROs. Thank you.
Ms. Reed, thank you very much. And it's, as always, great to see you.
You too, sir. You too.
I want to just ask you a quick question before I go to questions of the work group. Are you aware that the Prince George's County Educators Association, I know you represent the administrators, which are the principals and assistant principals. Right. Are you aware that PGCEA supports the removal of SROs? They're in the school. What are your thoughts on that? Because they are also in the school with the administrators.
I haven't really talked to Teresa Dudley, the president, about this specifically, but I'm not surprised. It doesn't really affect them. Like I said, they're not the ones that are breaking up the fights. They're in the classrooms, and that's not to say that there aren't teachers who will come out of that classroom and jump in there and help an administrator break up a fight. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying for the most part, it's the administrators. It's not really the teachers that are going to get into it. If something happens in the classroom, they call administrator, come down and get this kid out of the classroom. So it doesn't affect the teachers as much. So I'm not surprised on that.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Reed. I appreciate the response. Ms. Oriata.
Thank you for your words. And you took half my question, Alonzo, elevating that there is a union and representatives of people that are in the schools that do support removing SROs. But just a question about, because I think sometimes we can get tied down to to the point of SROs, which are just, you know, armed police officers versus security versus any other entity. And do you feel like, because some of the recommendations have been to have security and just remove the arresting power from current securities, so you still have the buffer between teachers and administrators. It's just not armed police officers, and you just don't have the arresting power. So I'm just my question is, why is that not work when you still have an individual and the burden is still not on administrators or teachers? All it does is remove the arresting power and the position of armed officers. So would that not be exactly what you're asking for, which is to have someone as a buffer between administrators and
Well,
students?
first of all, you'll never be able to remove the responsibility from the administrators, especially the principal. They're responsible for everything that happens in that school. And if anything breaks out in that school, they're responsible for it. Not the teachers, not the secretaries or whatever. It's always going to fall on the administrator. You know, we don't have a problem with someone else. Well, let me ask you a question first. Are you talking about like hiring private security to come in and take the place of the SROs?
No, so some of the recommendations have been around, we currently have, like you said, the more security actually than we do have SROs. Some of the recommendations were around retraining the current security officers that we have in school, removing the arresting power, increasing those numbers, and then removing just the armed police officers. So increasing the security, retraining them to have a better interaction with youth, and removing the arresting power, because the point you brought up is that a lot of the arresting happens with security officers. So you'd still have that individual that is responsible for stepping in and taking that interaction and that burden off of administrators or teachers.
Ms. Oriata, I think she got the question. So let's have Ms. Reed answer the question.
Okay. Well, I think first of all, school security does need to have more training. That's not a question. Although as far as like the officers in the school training, just to share this with you, our officers, there happen to be my members, they actually do training for the other counties' school security. And a lot of people don't know that, but they do that. I guess my concern is if you were not going to have anyone in the school that's armed, what would you do if there's an active shooter? You know, that's what I'm saying. We have kids that bring guns to school. We have parents who have shown up with guns to schools. So if there's no law enforcement person, security, whatever you want to call that, because I know that seems to be the concern of people were, having someone armed in the school. But if you don't have someone, even if it's just that one SRO or whatever position, if you don't have one person in there that's armed, how are they going to stop an active shooter? You know, I mean, this is what I'm saying. Like, a mental health person is not going to stop a person with a gun.
Ms. Reed, I think you answered the question. I'm gonna go to our next question, which is Ms. Josephine Morning.
Well, good evening, Miss Reed. Thank you so much. How you doing? And I agree with just what you said, and I think this has been my position. However, here's the problem that I have. We find that a lot of our kids now are getting records, criminal records before they leave school, which really is setting them up for failure after graduation because they've already have this record, criminal record. And I understand a lot of it is stemming from like fights. Fights have been in schools since, the 1800s, right. And they're going to continue to be in school. But a lot of times there's been ways to diffuse these type of fights, and the next day they're friends or whatever. So this is the problem that I have with this, and I want to know, what would you suggest that we could do to try to limit how many of these kids gets to go to the criminal system?
And that I'm going to say is well beyond my expertise, because one of the concerns that the administrators do have is exactly that these kids are ending up with a record. there is assault leave that is in the law that provides for any employee, not just administrators. If they're assaulted on the job, they can apply for assault leave and go out for however much time they need. Well, one of the problems with the policy that the board had for assault leave was you had to report that student to the police. So there were a number of employees who would not apply for assault leave because they did not want to report the kids to the police and give them a record. So Dr. Golson has, changed that with our encouragement. She has changed that part of the policy. So that's a big issue for the administrators too, is, they don't want these kids to have a record. And like I said, that's beyond my field of expertise, because we do, talk about that, but how do you do it? I be honest with you, I don't have that answer.
Thank you so much. I'm concerned because we also have I saw a lot of people with mental problems being arrested.
Thank
you.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Reed, for your presentation. And as always, great to see you. And so with that, I think that concludes our meeting today. Judge, any closing remarks?
No, I'd like to say that I thought it was a wonderful meeting. All the presenters did a wonderful job. It was very informative.
Yeah, I also would like to just say I want to thank Ms. Stokes of the OHRM for a presentation earlier on the police chief update. I want to thank Mr. Green's family. I know it's very hard to come here today to speak on a tragic loss of their family member. Mr. Consoli, Lieutenant Consoli, excuse me, of the FOP for being here. Reverend Lee, Ms. Pope, Ms. Parker, Mr. Torres. I want to thank Ms. Reed and Ms. Reed and Ms. White for all being here today. And I also want to thank our members for being here. As you all know, we are winding down and getting our recommendations to us, to the two co-chairs to set up for our meeting on recommendations and voting for recommendations. So our subcommittees are still meeting every week, and they'll be meeting next week. Our final meeting next week, Thursday, final public input meeting is next week, where we'll be hearing from Acting Chief Hector Velez. He'll be giving a presentation to us and hopefully some great recommendations to this work group. And he'll be presenting from the police department's perspective. And then we will hear another time, for the second time, from the public, because we are trying to work as much as we can with the public to get their input on where we should go with our recommendations and provide significant input in our recommendations and our final recommendations to the county executive. So again, for everyone at home, our meeting will be next week, Thursday at 4 p.m. Please sign up to speak online on the county executive's website, where you can sign up. There will be another email going out to the public about this forum, and we are looking forward to hearing your thoughts to inform our recommendations to the county executive. With that said, thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Thanks.
See you all next week.